ladies and gentlemen, I would like to ask you to find your seat so we can start with second panel. Okay, so let me introduce myself. First, my name is Petra Vejvodová, and I'm working as an assistant professor at Masaryk University at the Department of Political Science, and I am a head of Security and Strategic Studies. And I was asked to moderate a panel focusing on political radicalism and populism, so I'm very pleased to be here. And I would like to introduce our panelists first. So here today it's here with us Robert Ormerod, sorry, it's a little bit complicated, from Aarhus University in Denmark. Then it's Tamás Latman from Institute for International Relations from Hungary. It's also Christian Lassen from Institut for European Policy in Denmark. Then it's also Roman Joch from Civic Institute, Czech Republic, and Jan Macháček from Institute for the Politics and Society, also Czech Republic. So the order of our panel will be like that. All the panelists, they have 15 minutes to present their contributions, their ideas about political radicalism and populism in Europe in context of migration crisis and so on. And then we will discuss these issues with you, with the audience, and answering your questions. So I would like to ask Robert to start.
Thank you. Great, can I just have the connector, please?
Which one?
This one, just yes. Right, whilst we're sorting out the technology, yes, there we are. Just ruin everything. These are people who use Macs. There we are. And work. There we are. Right. Let me just. Right, well, I'm an academic, an associate professor at Aarhus University in Denmark. Now, Denmark also has a very sort of vibrant culture of discussion around the sort of immigration issue and the asylum seekers issue. What I was going to talk to you about today was social media marketing and storytelling, because my research area is political marketing. I'm actually employed at a management department rather than the political science department. One thing I noticed at the last panel was the level of emotion. Now, originally my presentation was going to be called Combating Political Extremism Using Social Media Marketing. Why should the devil have all the best stories? Now, what you're going to do, you're going to see it's exactly the same. But is it? It's about perception. Political extremism. We had, let's just put it mildly, a lively interchange between Benjamin and the gentleman who, unfortunately, I didn't catch his name. Who sort of walked, sorry?
Alexander Domsky.
Domsky, okay, Domsky. So, Mr. Domsky and Mr. Tallis had an interaction. Now, asking Mr. Tallis, political extremism is one thing. Asking Mr. Domsky, political extremism is something else. What is political extremism? And what, ladies and gentlemen, or who, is the devil? Now, one thing I say to all my students is, I will never give you an answer. I will only try and ask the right questions. So, once you've listened to my presentation here today, you won't hear any answers from me. But hopefully, what you're going to be able to do is to think about the right questions. Okay. One thing that I also noticed was this whole thing about emotion versus fact. Now, you find many of the arguments that are being put forward in sort of this forum are to do with fact. You know, but what about the emotion? Emotions ran high in the last part of this this conference. But most people are no longer supporters of one political idea. They use emotion to decide. And this is part of, in a marketing understanding, our understanding of a postmodern society from this marketing perspective. And basically, it's because we all have multiple personalities. We are all a collection of dichotomies, multichotomies as it were, because we are faced with different contexts every single day. How we react to these contexts is based upon our assumptions, it's based upon our upbringing, it's based upon who we are, what we've experienced. Now, my background is actually pretty similar to Mr. Tallis. I was born and raised in the UK, and at the age of 20, I moved to Denmark, and I've lived there ever since. Now, when we talk about immigration, I often tried to speak Danish when I first moved to Denmark. The problem was that Danes wanted to speak English with me. Now I said, well, you know, I'm a first-generation immigrant. And they said, oh, but you're different. I said, no, I'm not. I'm not different. My wife is American. She's got dark hair and dark eyes. Once upon a time, she was told to go back to where she came from. Now, she's half Cuban and comes from New York. So then she opened her mouth and all was well, all of a sudden. Strange. So, what is the fiction and what is the fact? The point is we need to find the right stories. And from a marketing perspective, we need to find these right stories. We need to structure them in the correct way. And we need to put them out through the correct media. So, what I'm going to do is to talk a little bit about social media marketing. It's got to be short. It's got to be relatable. Individuals have got to be able to say, oh yeah, that's, I understand that. It's got to be recognizable, credible personas. Trigger an emotional response. Positive imagery. And they contain a suggested solution. Now, one of the memes that's been going around Facebook in conjunction with the Brexit is of, well, I'm just going to read out the text of this meme and I want you to think about it. Polish and Czech immigrants are coming over and taking our jobs. Now, this is a sentiment that's echoing around Great Britain all the time. So, what happens when you juxtapose a picture of fighter pilots in the Second World War, Czechs and Poles who escaped Nazism and joined up to the RAF to fight for Britain against the Luftwaffe? The point of this meme is to say, yes, we have one idea, we have one message, but it's the framing that's important. Now, how do we relate that to the sort of the marketing processes and social media processes? Well, it's short. It's an image and a sentence. Everyone can just read it, press a like on Facebook, and call it good. It's relatable. Oh yes, you know, there's this big sense of, you know, is Britain standing alone, you know, against the aggressive European Union? Whoa. They can relate to it. Recognizable and credible individuals. You know, in British history, you can't have a more credible bunch than those fighter pilots. Trigger an emotional response. Yes, you know, Britain. Ugh. Emotion. Positive imagery certainly contains that. Contain a suggested solution. Well, maybe not that. But the point I'm trying to make is that when you look at the social media, and this can be Facebook, this can be Flickr, Twitter, it depends upon the framing. It also depends upon engagement. Now we can say there are sort of two main sorts of engagement. There's user-generated content, which is just normal people creating memes, you know, creating these images, these sentences, these taglines, and putting them out on the internet. We've also got co-created content. Now basically this is when you have like a professional organisation, but it allows individuals to actually come in and affect, to engage in what's going on. Now, both of these are really important. The question is, how do we do it? Well, from a structural perspective, it's necessary to have these messages be able to be transferred on multiple platforms. iPads, iPhones, PDAs, PCs, Apple Macs, whatever. These messages have to be able to be transmitted. But what about the social media? I mean, I just put up Facebook, Twitter, blogs, Flickr, etc. There needs to be one message. So when this story is created, a story about a history, a story about the good old days. You know, we had a discussion about, you know, was communism fantastic? Well, was it? Hindsight is 2020. We all look through rose-tinted spectacles at the past. So the issue is one message. What about the story? Now, marketers see the postmodern society as basically a collection of stories. If you're going to sell anything, you need to create a story about it. So what is the story of the European Union? Which individuals control this story? Now we can say the stories, they're simply fiction based upon reality. So what do these stories contain? Well, stories contain images and symbols that connect yesterday with today with tomorrow. So this faction, as it were, fiction and reality, they play together. So my question is, how can the stories provided by the European Union contribute to a better understanding? And in this individual context, how can these stories be framed in a way to make them edible, as it were? Now, my parents are working class. For them, it wasn't a problem that I went to a school with lots of sort of different nationalities and different religious beliefs. It wasn't a problem. My father, he worked with many different individuals from many different countries. But now, they're retired. They only see certain messages. Nigel Farage, he shouts loudest. So what do? Well, in the Brexit, they're probably going to vote no. They want to leave the European Union. They're just normal people. But they are being faced with these stories, with these social media messages all the time that says, it's bad. It's bad to be part of the European Union. Now, I tried to talk to them about the implications for myself. I mean, obviously, my wife is not an EU citizen. So what's going to happen there? Is she going to get kicked out? Because as a Briton, I'm not part of the EU anymore. But that's not something that faces them in their everyday life, in their own reality. This, ladies and gentlemen, brings me to the next point, and that is, well, we have our individual reality, and we have the collective reality. Now, much of the discussion in the last panel was about sort of us and the European Union and sort of, you know, the different nation states, the Czechs and the Poles and the Hungarians and the Brits. But when it comes down to it, it's individuals that are going to vote for the Brexit in the Hungarian referendum. It's not groups of people, it's individuals. So we need to find stories that relate to individuals. So the question is, who to target? Now, from a marketing perspective, you need to focus on those individuals who are most likely to send your message on. Now, of course, being sort of pro-European means that you would expect that people who will pass on your message, if you are a pro-European, is one of, these people have to agree with you. No, they don't. They can be in complete opposition to you. Because the point is not so much who's passing it on, if it's just on your Facebook feed, it's the fact that it appears there. Now, I think many of us who've got a Facebook profile will see all of a sudden these pictures come up, and you sort of think, oh yes, okay, fine. You press like and you've forgotten about it. But if these images are tailored, then we can also get individuals who are against the idea of the European Union to actually pass on the message. So I'm just embarrassing you. I do that with my students. I just wait, Right, where was I? Now I've lost my train of thought, thank you very much. Yes, individual messages. The point is that the message that is being passed along doesn't have to be passed along with someone who agrees with you. The point is that it's passed along. Because, say I pass on a positive message. My parents see it in their feed. I would vote to stay in the European Union if I could vote in the UK. Which I can't, believe it or not. Can't. Because I've been outside the UK for too long. So I'm not allowed to vote. Now, this affects me greatly. I'm screwed if Britain leaves, basically. But my parents can vote. Now, with this Facebook feed, I get something I think, yes, okay, finally, I've got the opportunity to do something to show my support. So it goes onto their feed and they see it and they think, oh, well, yeah, okay, maybe. Because don't forget, my grandmother lived in Tottenham in 1940. So it's quite close, this family history of the European Union, as it were. But, am I on time? Okay, I shall go forward to this very, very briefly. Now, those of you who know, in Denmark there is currently a campaign by the Nationalist Party. Now, basically the wording is, our Denmark, there's so much we need to look after. Fair enough. Note the Photoshop golden retriever. Yes, it's quite pale, a white golden retriever. Now, all those people are taken to be stereotypical Danes, according to this Nationalist Party. Now, well, their voters, yes, they are stereotypical. But then if you look at the more normal spectrum of Danish people, that's what they look like. Yeah? Don't forget, my son's a second-generation immigrant. So, all we're talking about second-generation immigrants, it depends upon perspective. He speaks 5 languages. He goes to an international school. He identifies somewhat with being English, but that's only because in his class there are Germans, Turks, Iranians. The point is perspective. Do you see that as being modern-day Denmark? Or do you see that as being modern-day Denmark? What is your perspective? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my concluding question. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. working. Thank you, Robert, for your presentation. I'm not sure I fixed this. Something is going on? Yes. Cool. So now I would like to ask you, Tomáš, if you can continue with your presentation. We will just switch places with your presentation as well.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you and to talk with you about the problems that we face regarding to extremism and generally with all kind of problems regarding that is going on with the European Union, specifically around the migration crisis today. I chose my topic for a more detailed analysis, political radicalism and populism on the government level, because I thought that is quite a unique subject that we may be interested in talking about. And actually that is where somewhere I believe that, okay, my Czech is still needing some professionalism. I have just moved to Prague 2 months ago. Okay, could somebody please do something with it? Oh, it's working! Sorry, this is a completely different screen. Okay, whatever. Before going into the just one thought from the previous lecturer, from previous presenter, I think that fits into some of the problems that I may have. I mean, not me, but whatever. You just mentioned the Polish and the Czech soldiers fighting valiantly in the Second World War. But you know, I guess, many of you know, that most of these soldiers have been denied the glory and the respect of participating in the Berlin Victory Day parade. Because of political reasons. Because the Soviet Union and their respective governments have denied this glory from them. Now this is something, I believe, that is worth a thought before going into this extremism, radicalism, populism on the governmental level. Because this is showing us that individuals, non-government actors and sphere can do the best that they can, but sometimes the results may just do not happen because of some counter-governmental politics or interests. And I would like to some extent refer to some of the thoughts from the previous session. I refer back to the point that many of the commentators and many of the speakers have made that Euroscepticism as such is something which is very complex, and I could not agree more. Actually, in my thinking, in my way of thinking about this problem, I have already made some sort of like distinctions between standard Euroscepticism as it is and something that I just call to myself and to my friends and to my colleagues as sort of like Euro lies or whatever. This is not a canonized expression. It is just sort of like a food for thoughts. I just believe that there are some common elements between, when talking about Euroscepticism and the representatives of talking Euro lies. The common elements are that both of them target to reach some domestic political goals, as just reaffirmed by some colleagues before, and I guess it's sort of like commonplace today, that we don't really have a hardcore European political level. It would be nice to have it. Some may argue that there is some embryonic phase on that, but currently now, we'll get back to this thought in just a minute, we still lack it, we still don't have it. And one of the other common elements that could be argued is that both of these are directed against the European integration as we know it. At this point I would already be a bit more detailed, and actually I would just put more emphasis on the differences between Euroscepticism and Euro lies in my mind. And my first point here, and I don't want to offend anybody, even though I have a bad habit of being provocative usually, but my argument here is that Euroscepticism can be constructive at the end of the day. It may raise valid questions, it may refer to problems that we are having in the European integration, because I would never be so brave to say that European integration as such is ready and perfect. It's not ready and perfect because mostly because it's made of humans, and even worse, it's made by politicians. So how could it be perfect? Maybe it could be ready at one point, but definitely it's not going to be perfect. I'm just going to bring some examples in a second to bring some, in my understanding, positive examples. But when it comes to some sort of Euroscepticism, which is Euro lies that I call, is that there are some vast differences. So the first one is that the thing that I mean here as part of Euroscepticism is not skeptic at all. So I just have problems calling something Eurosceptic which straight out says that Europe sucks. I don't see any skepticism in there. I see a straight out statement which can be debated, but the point is that it shall be debated. And Euroscepticism, the positive part of Euroscepticism in my reading is that it involves debates. And if these debates are conducted properly, then we can come to some results, which may take the integration further, if we want to take it any further at all. That is a very important question. That is one of the fundamental questions that we usually try to avoid. Do we want this integration? Do we want to make it more deeper? Do we need it to be deeper? Or what the hell, where the hell we are going to? And in some cases, I believe that we are just avoiding these questions. Now, when I'm talking about Euro lies, and I'm talking about communication, which is usually based on false statements or misunderstandings of facts, or, and I would just like to underline this here, especially simplifying of complex problems. For example, just what we have seen in the earlier session with that heated debate is actually that the reason in some cases of heated debates is that we try to simplify very difficult questions. And I'm just a lawyer, I'm sorry to say, so I would never take a position in an economical question, questions of economic nature. But for example, one question like the economic usefulness of migration is one typical very complex question that we had the great enjoyment of seeing more sides of it, put some light to, and that's a good, and that's a good thing. Now, sometimes in government communications, you definitely do not see this kind of complexity, because the governments are communicating, political actors are communicating using very simplified terms. And that's another question of analysis, if it's good or bad, what is the reason of it, etc., etc. But this is how Euro lies is being built on. The big difference is between the intentions of sometimes Euroscepticist point, is that the issues, the communications that I refer to Euro lies aims to incite fear or straight out false knowledge about the European Union. And the method is to abuse the ignorance or the lack of knowledge of the political audience. And these things are working together because these are very straightforward statements using the ignorance or the not knowledge, and they have a hostile intent towards the European integration. And put it all together, it has a destructive effect under all circumstances. How destructive? It's still up to the future. So as I told you, the Euroscepticism I do not necessarily consider being a necessarily bad thing, because I believe that Euroscepticism has the capacity to raise very important questions. And I just put some of these questions up here to the slide with capitals. The general question, do we need the European integration actually? My answer to this is obviously yes. And I believe that the vast majority's answer to this is yes, but we are living in democracies, at least most of us, even me as a Hungarian, because I'm living in Prague now. So that means that freedom of speech shall work as a tool to address any of these questions. And I believe that the one before the last, the proper use of transferred competencies, is one of the most important questions in the European Union. And I'll just put two examples here up on the slide, two examples from recent past of European legal sphere, and I'm sorry, but I'm still a lawyer, so I focus my attention on these cases. But the quite well-known Sólyom case, which is Hungary initiating an infringement procedure against Slovakia because of denying access to the then Hungarian president to the country. Many individuals, many people in Hungary curse this case as being politically biased, it was ordered by the President Viktor Orbán government, and this is sort of like showing strength toward the European Union and Slovakia and everybody. It's the sign of the famous Hungarian irredentism. Well, you know, the situation itself happened in 2009. Viktor Orbán has come into power in 2010. And personally, I was one of the individuals in Hungary who was arguing quite intensely for taking this case against Slovakia and to the European Court. Not because being a chauvinist or too irredentic to myself, but because I believed, and I think I was right, that the Luxembourg court had one of the most important decisions and judgments derived out of this seemingly completely stupid case. Why do I think that it was a very important case? Because deciding on this case, the European Court of Justice have made a judgment of a milestone importance regarding to the nature of the European Union. The European Court of Justice has said that Slovakia had not violated European Union law. This is the point where the Hungarian media had put up the white flag and said, oh my god, we lost it, because that is the reason how the media is working. But actually the point of the case was that the European Court said that Slovakia had not violated European Union law because European Union law is not applicable here, because international law is applicable here. That is a very important message saying, in other words, the European Union is not a single state. And that is the point, and that is the importance of the decision. Was it a valid question? I think it was a valid question. I think it was important. And you can give a political or an ideological driven explanation to this case. But I believe, even though this case is usually criticized by Eurosceptics in Hungary because they just criticize everything. But this is a very important case which is serving for the goals of those guys who sit on the side of Euroscepticism saying that the EU is not one single country. So I believe that this is a very important case. The other one, which is not decided yet, is the annulment procedure initiated by Hungary and also by Slovakia against the Council recently against the decision of the Council of Ministers of Interior against the quota, which I guess you all know. Now at this point, even though I am one of the individuals who criticize the current Hungarian government quite much, at this point I believe that the Hungarian government, I don't say that they are right, because this has to be said by the European Court, but I believe that contesting the legislation judgment of the Council is a legitimate thing, and that is how you should do it. Contrary to another tool, which was already mentioned by Csaba, with the national referendum, that I'm going to touch later again. So these are good examples. Now, there are very bad examples regarding to Euro lies in the international sphere. I don't want to talk too much about it because I guess all of them know it. Some of those, but I would just, because we are in Prague, I would just remind to the famous rant of Václav Klaus against Lisbon Treaty in 2009, saying that he is doing it in defense of the Beneš decrees, which is straight out lunatism. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And all of the other examples that you may find here, and some of those that I did not really mention here, is the problem that actually a government is taking a non-existing problem, scaring the individuals and the people with that, and then acting like a hero in the shining armor to solve the problem, just like Václav Klaus did, which was completely something that didn't make any sense. We could just bring all the others. Now, one of the problem here is the Hungarian national referendum against the quota, which is a very nice example, and the reason I wanted to bring it out now, because I believe that this is the first actual case when this sort of like Euro lies stuff is being transferred into actual political action. Because usually what we see that Euro-lies things are just going in the communicative space and then they go away. They have some political effects, they help to stabilize a government, they help David Cameron to get re-elected, for example, and then they go away. But now nobody knows what is going to happen if Hungary is going to have this referendum. Now, you may talk about the emerging legal questions. I think it would be nice, but believe me, as one of the individuals who were attacking this contest in front of the Supreme Court of Hungary just recently, I could talk you like 2 hours at least about it. But considering the fact that the Supreme Court of Hungary has just made the shame of their life, or ever its historical existence, in the decision, serving the government's political wills, I will just skip it. It doesn't make any sense, and of course, during the evening it would be nice to talk about it informally. But let's consider this from the aspect of the main analysis. What are the elements of Euro-lies that I identify in this question? The question is put up there. It's not an official translation of the question text. Let me tell you, I do not know if there is an official, credible translation of it. I would just like to draw your attention that some of the translations that you may find in the international press are wrong. And I'm not saying it's intentionally wrong. I would have the feeling basically that they were taking the translation from the official Hungarian governmental sources, and they are intentionally wrong. I am quite sure about it. So for example, do you want the EU to prescribe the mandatory settlement of non-Hungarian citizens to Hungary without the approval of the Hungarian parliament? That is the question. What are these Euro-lies elements? The first one, and this is the point where I see a big difference, is settlement. All the translations I have found on the internet about this question is saying mandatory relocation and not mandatory settlement. Now, mandatory relocation doesn't sound so bad, right? The settlement sounds much worse. And actually in the Hungarian language, it is straightforward being used, the Hungarian word for settlement, meaning that you got an individual and put it down here. That is what the Hungarian text is saying. Actually, does this have any connection to the reality of the text of the original decision by the council? Not really. But you know, it's good for the Hungarian voters. So they shall be afraid of being all kind of Muslims settled in there. So that's one point. It's a lie, or at least a simplifying, or at least a falsification of the facts. Without the approval of the Hungarian parliament, another thing is that you have to know, I guess everybody knows, that all the decisions made on these issues are going to be made by the relevant Hungarian authorities. And they were created by the Hungarian parliament, all the laws were created by the Hungarian parliament. So the Hungarian parliament has made a decision on accepting all of the international laws applicable to migration and refugees. So of course there is a decision of the Hungarian parliament behind everything that is happening. But you know, it's just put up the image of the hostile European Union without even being explained in the question what the hell the European Union means. That is something, a nasty evil, some evil enemy somewhere. And then that is how it's actually working. All of the people in Hungary, many people of course, who just do not have any emotional prerequisites regarding to this question or to the government, they just tend to accept it. And that is something which is falsifying once again the whole concept. Now I don't want to talk too much about it, but one thing, just to your mind, how the government is thinking and playing the game in the migration. We have spent more than 20 billion Hungarian forints to build the fence on the southern borders. That is 2.5 times the money that Hungary altogether spends on the immigration authority, meaning all of the costs of migration policies in Hungary. And how many people do we want to keep away with this fence? There was a statement from the Minister of Interior before the fence saying that the Hungarian security forces capturing 97% of all immigrants in the territory of Hungary. So we are actually spending nearly 3 times the money for 3% of individuals. And you know, when the Hungarian people do not say that you're taking us for stupid, then nothing is going to. But that is how it's actually working, because there is another general Euro lie applicable here, employed by the Hungarian government from the initiation of the whole crisis, that is that member states can do the job better, which is, as a matter of fact, is not true, as you all know who have the basic information about the story of the European Union. Now my final conclusions, when I just use this practical example to this, I guess that there may be many more possible examples. That Eurolies and Euroscepticism are not necessarily distinct categories, and they seem to be like rather tools employed by political actors, and sometimes it's okay for political parties and other actors to do it, but governments have an additional responsibility in my understanding and how I mean. And for that reason, it's very, very dangerous when a government is employing these tools in the public discourse regarding to the European Union. It's even worse than just taking a position of being a straight-out racist or whatever, because in that case, at least we understand that, okay, my friend, you are a racist. Well, you have the right to be a racist. You are not going to be my best friend, but at least I know who you are. But when the governments are employing these kind of double standard speeches and communication, then it's incredibly, incredibly destructive. And just one last point, just think about what is going to happen if there is going to be this referendum held and it's going to be valid and result. Then Hungarian parliament will be obliged to create a law, but nobody actually knows yet what that law would be about. And I don't mean by text, I can't tell you what the content of that law would be, because this question is just incapable of serving as a basis of any future legislation on the domestic level. In the European Union level it could be, but Hungarian referendum cannot touch the European Union legislation level, according to some very basic legal, fundamental issues as we know it. But maybe the government is going to tell to the people at that time that we can. You can never know. That is going to be some sort of like a governmental extreme talk in that situation again. Thank you very much for your attention. Yeah.
Okay. So now it's time for our third speaker, Christian, who will be talking about also about Euroscepticism and how it's related with like kind of mainstream political parties and the European Union. So you can.
Is it working? Ah, yeah.
Yep.
All right. Thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for coming. Even though I wish the topic and the context was a bit more positive. When I was asked to speak here, the primary question for this panel was, is Euroscepticism a new tool for political propaganda and populism? And how to fight against politically successful radical ideas? Like Robert, I don't think I can completely answer the second part of the question. If we knew how to fight against successful, politically radical ideas, then I probably wouldn't be sitting here. I would be doing something else, like actually fight them. However, the first part of the question, whether or not Euroscepticism is a new tool for political propaganda and populism, I don't think that is the case. Euroscepticism is not a root cause, it's more of a symptom of a renationalization of public debates and a rise of nationalism in individual countries. Now, the question is, why is this happening? Why is the nation state suddenly on a compact when the EU more than ever could actually need unity and more cohesive and unified response to a current crisis? Well, as it is right now, Euroscepticism acts as an anchor and a shield for populist parties. If not for Euroscepticism, many of these populist parties, you see them in Denmark, the Danish People's Party, you see them other places in Scandinavia, and they would actually have to be held accountable, especially if they're poised for entering government, for many of their unsustainable financial policies. To put it into perspective, for instance, the Danish People's Party has throughout the years promised unfinanced welfare benefits, which of course appeals to the population in Denmark, for roughly 4 times Moldova's annual GDP. That's a staggering amount of money you're promising to people, be it additional healthcare, be it whatever. However, Euroscepticism acts as a very convenient shield to always fall back on. And the reason it does it is, of course, that the European Union has gone through two very, very serious, and I wouldn't say grave, but definitely serious crises that have impacted public opinion, maybe more so than people themselves, actually. I'm loath to say it regarding the financial crisis of 2008, because that was a very tangible crisis. It was something that was felt deeply in the European Union, in many countries, and it also highlighted a divide, especially between the north and the south of Europe, where you had countries like Greece who are still struggling, countries like Spain with structurally high youth unemployment, countries who still feel the impact of the economic crisis, whereas in the north, at least in Denmark, there was very much a perception that, okay, we're being hit by the crisis, but we also have to pay for the slouches down south who didn't have properly controlled economy, or who had widespread corruption, or who, just in the case of Greece, for instance, didn't collect taxes, even though, yeah, it sounds stupid, at least to the north back then. And of course, it becomes widely attributed to the European Union. The European Union becomes associated with the responsibility of the crisis because European responses were implemented in an effort to combat it. However, I would argue in many cases the financial crisis was the very first true test of the European Union after it enlarged from a mere 15 states to 27 and later 28, almost doubling it. This very first test came very, very soon. In previous expansions you had smaller European expansions, very gradual, often with at least 5 years in between, often with countries that were more economically well off. Suddenly you expand with 12 new countries, and subsequently you're being hit by the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, a global one. Of course the EU tries to take action and is still trying to this day to take action. Recently, back in 2015, the 5 Presidents report was released, which further attempts to complete the banking and the monetary union. However, that's almost 8 years after the crisis, and of course it provides ammunition for people who feel that the European Union is not taking timely and decisive action. And then afterwards, when we now have the migration crisis, which I would argue is a lot more diffuse than the financial crisis. A financial crisis made people lose jobs, it made them lose money, it made them lose their pensions, sometimes even homes. The refugee crisis is not similar, it's less tangible and it is more diffuse. However, it ties extremely well into this rising Euroscepticism that was really, it wasn't born out of the financial crisis, but it was made articulate, it was made tangible. And as it is right now, with the refugee crisis, a lot of uncertainty remains of what the actual impacts will be for it. You have Benjamin, like on the previous panel, reciting sources from UCL, research showing that migrants will generally be beneficial, they will pay dividends after a period of integration. Then you have others, I would argue, based on the previous panel, more emotional voices that outright argue that Muslims are a problem, or at least that migrants are not beneficial. And there is a case to be made for either. I mean, we can all find research that supports our view, but it ties more deeply than just a cost-benefit analysis. it is not just a question of whether or not migrants will pay dividends, even though that is what we often reduce it to. The whole resistance to migration, or the rise of populism and Euroscepticism, also ties into a deeper globalization feeling. I know that sounds very wishy-washy, but like Robert mentioned, we're essentially all having multiple personalities, or at least we're all having a wildly changing context and differences of reality. And the nation states provides a very compelling umbrella to encompass all these identities, all these multiple identities that are otherwise maybe difficult to reconcile. The new thing is, what has really changed is that the EU is actively being framed as an enemy. The EU has widely been placed as, well, if we look back to the previous century, nations went to war with each other. The EU has in many ways replaced that animosity towards fellow nation states, has become the other against which we can frame our nationalist or populist politics as the simple solution, as Tamas, was that the name? Yeah, as Tamas mentioned, it allows populist politicians to come as the knight in shining armor, riding in, providing the simple solutions. It's also why, for instance, you see the Progress Party in Norway, their slogan is a simpler every day. Now, I don't know if anyone has been to Norway, but it's pretty simple being as wealthy and as well off as Norwegians. But it still appeals to people. It still appeals making a simpler every day. Now, I do mention Norway. Norway is not an EU member state, but Norway is interesting because Norway was one of the first countries who actually had a far-right party attempting to enter government, and which did enter government right now. The far-right party, before it got elected into government, had 22% of the country votes. It's a very large amount. After it got elected into government, it fell to, I think the lowest was 10%, which was a dramatic decrease in voter support. In Norway, you're not a member of the European Union, so Euroscepticism can't really create the full foundation for your populist party. You can't always fall back and use Euroscepticism as an anchor for your populist ideas. You can't always divert attention from your unsustainable economic policies to Euroscepticism, which is what is happening in a lot of different countries, Denmark included. So the result was, of course, that they were held accountable for their election promises, for all their unfinanced welfare promises, and they take a dramatic beating subsequently, very shortly after entering government. Which is also why, for instance, in Denmark, the Danish People's Party, who became the second largest party, even larger than the current governing party, didn't want to enter government because suddenly you have to take responsibility, you have to be held accountable. However, a lot of parties are poising themselves, biding their time to eventually enter government. It's the same with the Danish People's Party in Denmark. And as time goes by, Euroscepticism is going to increase. It's going to become more and more pronounced. Part of it is because the EU, in my opinion, is not extremely good at connecting with the public. We all know the talks about the democratic deficit. People feel that Brussels is too far removed from them, that decisions are imposed on them. Whether or not that's true is arguable. It's not always the case. Well, you can always argue that it's actually far from the case. Of course, Brussels often tries to intervene. Of course, you can make the case that Brussels intervenes in sovereignty. but it's not always necessarily a bad thing. If we're going to return to the economic crisis and the initiatives and measures implemented or being attempted to be implemented in response to it, you had the completion of the banking union and the capital markets union, where if you complete the monetary union to become, well, more coherent, a bit like the United States, it also means you can spread risk and pain and gain across states, because a recession in one state will be spread out on the others. A boom in another state would spread equally. By linking them, which is currently now quite underdeveloped in the European Union, you would make it more resistant to the financial crisis you had previously. However, it's very easy to make the argument that the nation is losing sovereignty, Brussels is interfering, Brussels is imposing, and then you simply go against it, because as it is right now, the populists are providing all the simple solutions. Like it was stated in the previous panel, it's very easy to just continuously say no, but it's harder to make the compelling solutions and decisions. It's harder to provide perspective, and I wouldn't say truth, because that's of course hard to determine always, and I wouldn't say that I'm a proponent of truth necessarily, but at least having a wider perspective would be beneficial, especially in relation to the refugee crisis. Because as it is right now, a lot of countries are making it sound like they're collapsing under the burden of refugees, that it is completely unprecedented, they have never seen anything like it. It's not true. Denmark took more Muslim refugees during the Bosnian and the Kosovo wars than they did last year. This is not unprecedented, this is not something we cannot manage or control. And yet that is what the populations feel, because it is what their governments are expounding. It is what the governments are saying. In the case of Denmark, we have to take valuables from refugees to finance their stay, because apparently we can't properly finance it. We're almost hitting rock bottom, even though the refugee burden consisted of less than 0.02% of the Danish GDP last year. If that is what it takes to tip the whole iceberg, then Denmark probably has worse problems than refugees that can replace an aging demography if it's integrated well. Anyway, to quickly round off, because I've kind of exceeded my time. I think it's hard to provide a conclusive answer to how we can successfully combat these radical political ideas that are becoming more and more mainstream, that are becoming more and more, or gaining more and more traction in the general public. But I think one way to start would be to somehow increase the knowledge about it. And of course that's a very simple thing to say, because like in the previous panel, in the case of Jobbik in Hungary, Jobbik was actually gaining from positive mentioning of refugees. But as it is right now, there are very few voices that have the same platform as the populist politicians who rage against refugees of any kind and Islam of any kind. And it is being simplified way too much. Like even Islam is more than just one religion, there are different branches of it. And the lack of knowledge is really dictating also the European responses. If the European responses were based on a more reflected, a more knowledgeable or a more courageous stance, you could also start trying to shape public opinion in a more sustainable way. But as it is right now, panic generally rules and we cater to the lowest common denominator. So unless we change that, any initiatives to combat it are going to be an almost Sisyphean task. Because if we don't have politicians who want to go against public opinion and do what's right, then yeah, we're just blowing in the wind and the most base human nature will dictate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Christian, for your words. And now I would like to ask you, Roman, if you can continue with your speech. Thank you.
Thank you. I will try to be short. I will try to answer two questions. The first, dealing with the relationship between Euroscepticism and populism and radicalism. That's the first question. And the second question, the second issue is, are we four countries more radical than the rest of Europe? But before that, I hope well, I have heard that there was a heated discussion in the last panel. I wasn't here for the first panel, but let us hope this panel will have some discussions too. Norway was mentioned. I obviously would never travel to Norway with my children because I wouldn't risk that my children will be stolen and confiscated by some crazy and nasty Norwegian bureaucrat. But let us return to the European Union, to the first question, the connection between Euroscepticism and populism or radicalism. I would say the short answer would be that the reason for that relationship or connection is that there is no politics on the European level. There is no politics. And there is no politics because there is no federation. The European Union is not a federation, it is an incest between a state and sovereign nation states. The most powerful European institution is the European Council. It has executive powers and it has more or less substantial part of legislative powers. What's the European Council? Prime ministers of nation states who decide serious issues by fiat, often behind closed doors. In the European Parliament and in the European Commission, you have no political fight. You have a cartel between Christian Democrats, European People's Party, European Socialists, and Alliance of Liberals. For the last 30 years, maybe more. So you have no political struggle on the European level. So there is no politics, and all those who are dissatisfied with the incumbent political establishment have what choice? To vote either for those who are irrelevant or for those who are crazies. And those crazies are mostly Eurosceptics. Let us compare that with a federation like the United States, or even with a nation state or a union like the United Kingdom. In the United Kingdom, you can have a choice between a Margaret Thatcher on one hand and Jeremy Corbyn on the other hand. I mean, as a political positions. That's a real choice. In America, in 2008, when you had had enough of that crazy, toxic Texan, George W. Bush, you could vote for hope and change, for Barack Obama. After 80 years of Barack Obama, if you have had enough of hopey, changey stuff, you can try to make America great again and vote for the Donald. So you can channel your frustration inside the system without trying to dismantle the United States. But let us imagine that there will be a similar cartel between Republicans and Democrats, like there is in the European Parliament and in the European Commission, between People's Party, Socialists and Liberals. What would you do if you are dissatisfied with the political establishment? If you live in green, left liberal Vermont and you are a vegetarian and hate those gun-toting, war-mongering, Bible-thumping Texans, you could have an idea for secession of a green paradise on earth called Vermont. Or perhaps you can even join Canada, which would be much better because that's multiculturalist paradise. If you are a Texan who really considers Vermontian left liberals to be sissies, what would you suppose? What would you suggest? Secession, of course. So if you don't have a clear political choice on certain level, then you could be in a temptation to leave the system. And that's the problem with the European Union, in a nutshell. From time to time, people are upset and met at the political establishment, that's okay in democracy. They could vote against those inside power, for those who are outside power. And I think that now many European citizens are dissatisfied with the European political establishment. And probably the last, so there are many reasons that they think or they feel, I wouldn't like to judge whether the feeling or the perception is right or wrong. I just try to mention that that's the fact. They think, many people, not all, many people think that the European establishment or political, intellectual, business establishment doesn't care for pains and problems of so-called normal, ordinary people. That the establishment is alienated from normal lives and worries of the people. And probably for these people, the last straw was immigration, the last year massive immigration wave. Why? Our political regime, liberal democracy, is based on two principles. The first principle are natural rights. Every person as a person has certain inalienable rights, right? To free speech, religion, and so on and so on. And that must be respected, those rights must be respected of all people, regardless whether they are citizens or foreigners. The other principle is the principle of social contract. Social contract, the basic manifestation of the social contract are elections. The government governs with the consent of the governed, and the consent of the governed is given in free and fair elections. But there is another aspect of a social contract, that the political society could establish its own rules for naturalization of foreigners. In the case of European society, foreigners are non-EU citizens. I don't consider EU citizens to be foreigners because our choice by social contract was to join all other 27 nation states to create one political society called the European Union. So foreigners are only non-EU citizens. Now, different societies could have different criteria. Or different people could have different opinions. Some people could prefer unlimited immigration. Other people could prefer very restrictive immigration. And both positions and any in between are just legitimate, like positions on taxes. Some people prefer lower taxes, some other people prefer higher taxes. That's a matter of political opinion. And we shouldn't demonize those who don't share our own preferences. For example, I myself think that any tax which is higher than 50% is obscene and immoral, because it makes a person to be more a serf than a free man. But that's a matter of opinion. Of course, socialists among you could have different opinions. However, what has been very unfortunate, at least in this country, and probably it's the same in other countries, is that people from both sides don't consider people from the other side to be wrong or mistaken, but to be traitors, And that's very dangerous, that's very emotional. Now, people don't object to gradual immigration. In this country, in the case of Ukrainians, Vietnamese. They are scared, or have been scared, by a wave. And they reacted in a very emotional way. And there is a second reason. People don't think that among, let us say, Vietnamese community in this country is a minority, inside the community is a Vietnamese minority, which hates liberal democratic principles. But people think that inside Muslim society as a whole, there is a small minority, tiny minority, but very radical, very vicious, which would like to kill all others who don't share its own political or religious opinions. And that's why people think that political establishment on the European Union, which has allowed, or some parts of that establishment even welcomed migration as a natural force which cannot be stopped. Well, you can stop changes of climate, but you cannot stop people. People perceive that as a violation of a social contract. And that's why they are radicalized. Had we had politics on the European level, they could vote for responsible opposition. We would criticize that. But there is no responsible opposition on the European level because there is a cartel, centrist cartel, center, center-right, center-left. And there is no meaningful opposition. And that's why many people who are radical and extremist naturally tend to Euroscepticism. Let us rock the boat. Let us sink the boat. We will be better off. Which, in my view, is absolutely crazy. conclusion. So that's the first question. And the second question, are V4 countries, which means Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic, more radical than the rest of Europe? I mean, the rest of Europe is meant the Western Europe. I would say no. We are not more radical, we are less radical, by far less radical. For example, in the last elections to the EP, the European Parliament, in 4 Western European countries, those elections were won by extremist parties. United Kingdom, France, Denmark, and Greece. In V4 countries, all winning parties belong to those 3 centrist groups: Christian Democrats, Socialists, or Liberals. We had no political assassination in the last 25 years in V4. Like there was a political assassination in the Netherlands in 2002 in Fortuna. We had no terrorist organizations in the last 25 years, like there was IRA in the United Kingdom, ETA in Spain, and November 17 in Greece. We had no mass slaughters for political reasons, like there was one in March of this year in Brussels, in January and November of last year in Paris, 2004 in Madrid, 2005 in London, and 2012, a British soldier in a uniform was beheaded publicly in South London because he was cheeky enough to fight for Queen and country. We had nothing like that in V4. So my conclusion is no political assassinations, no political mass murders, no terrorist organizations, no prominent politician ever assassinated in the last 25 years. So my conclusion is V4 countries are less radical than Western European as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech and really interesting thought. I guess that you will have a lot of questions, or at least I hope. And now I would like to ask Jan if you can conclude our conclude our panel with your contribution to this discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I would start with a few brief comments and reactions on what has been said, and then I would say something more consistent for a little while. But Roman fulfilled his role to be provocative enough, definitely.
You have poor Sasha Tomsky.
On the other hand, it's traditional, like Roman is a conservative, I am a liberal, both of us are pro-European. So I agree with him on certain things, but I disagree with him on the other things, and he certainly used the example, my favorite topic, like the most favorite topic, to comparing EU to the US federalism, which I'm even teaching, so we can speak about it for a long time. But start with what you said at the end, like it's true to an extent about V4 countries, but on the other hand, there is one thing which makes this like anti-refugee populism and xenophobia looking very gloomy and dark if you look at it from outside, because there are no refugees in these countries, basically. With an exception of Hungary, there was no contact with the refugees, and still the topic is able to decide the elections or have a strong impact on in the elections. So if people look at it from Western Europe or from America, it somehow smells very strange. Like why is it like that these countries which have no refugees are so obsessed with it, or the politics? So maybe psychologists would say that that's why they are so obsessed, because they have never seen any single refugees. It's maybe absolutely normal, but anyway, it looks very strange. It looks very strange from outside. And the second remark is that it's much more dangerous to play with political radicalism, populism, xenophobia here, because I agree, if you look at Austria, Italy, France, whatever, UK, this wasn't even mentioned here, even this like very nasty results of referendum in Netherlands about Ukraine, which it was really a huge disappointment for me. We speak about political culture, and because Holland is a traditional Western country, like so. The main difference is that these countries have never been in a sphere of Russian interest, right? Like so, it's easier or slightly less dangerous for them to play with fire than to play with fire in countries which were in the Russian sphere of influence. Plus, in Western European countries, there are much stronger and stable media, civic society, more deeply rooted, independent and functioning judicial system, etc., etc. So this is about like otherwise the populism is equally present in both Eastern and Western Europe. If we compare it with the situation at the September, Václav Basovský mentioned here also my favorite commentator. Sorry, Ivan Krastev. Yeah, sorry, I'm a little bit tired. So he was the first one who wrote an article. In the beginning of September, are Eastern Europeans like lacking compassion? Or for the New York Times and many other intellectuals followed up on it. I think that he wouldn't write this article again at this moment, watching what's FPÖ is the most popular country in Austria, and Five Star Movement is the most popular party in Italy, etc., etc. So. The situation is, and with the possibility of Brexit being quite possible, or with even another possibility of Donald Trump becoming a president. So he wouldn't probably write it today, but it was very inspiring and provoking and very important article, I agree. So it was, second remark has to do with the social media. I completely agree that it was in the first panel we could hear that traditional media are very irresponsible, especially tabloid media are big evildoers as far as the quality of political discussion is concerned. But I absolutely believe that this social media phenomenon is quite much more important in a negative way, I believe, unfortunately. We spoke about it yesterday at dinner with Mr. Outrata, who excellently compared it with the invention of book print, because before the invention of book printing, if I translate it correctly, it was only very few people read books and only very few people read Bible, etc. And suddenly everybody could read the Bible, for instance, and everybody aspired to have a strong opinion about the Bible, and people argued, and it resulted actually in very nasty wars lasting for decades or even centuries. So these days on social networks, everybody can be a journalist, everybody can be a politician. These complicated algorithms which we don't understand to really tend that people are supporting each other in their already established positions instead of discussions, etc. It's very vulnerable, as it was perfectly explained, to all kind of lies and all kind of hate. So hopefully it's not gonna work out like as Mr. Outrata proposed yesterday, that we might end up with the same results as after the invention of book printing, but which was in many respects progressive and positive and important for this and that, but otherwise it definitely radicalized the society a lot. So it shouldn't be underestimated the result of this. These days, as I said, everybody is a journalist, everybody is a commentator, everybody is a judge, at the very first, maybe, and so this makes the situation much more complicated. Now to a completely different topic. Europe is definitely facing many crises at the same time. It is facing the crisis of leadership, crisis of elites, crisis of solidarity, crisis of identity, crisis of Eurozone, crisis of migration, this and that. But above all, to me, it's an institutional and constitutional crisis, because Europe is still a project, it's still an experiment, and if as a project and experiment with unfinished institution, it makes it very unstable. Naturally, it's a project for a good weather, and it's not functioning when you have such major crises coming from outside, like financial crisis after 2008, Ukrainian or Russian aggression in Ukraine, to be precise, and migration crisis coming almost at the same time. So the crisis of solidarity and populism is, if you have such an unstable environment, it's absolutely a very fruitful soil for extremism and populism, and there would be much less extremism and populism if the institutions of EU are functioning better, are more stable, more deeply rooted. On the other hand, someone would say, how come that they might elect Donald Trump for president in the US if they have perfectly functioning institutions? But he is not a president yet, but I agree that it's an important counter-argument, but I really believe that populism is deeply connected with this phenomenon. There is the same approach with, or similar approach with the crisis of the Eurozone. You have constant chaotic emergency, late night at the morning ending sessions of the European Council, and these very chaotic summits who are constantly improvising, and this is without having a proper effective center for crisis management and for effective solutions of crisis coming from outside. It's not gonna end up well, I am afraid. When we use all these terms which are mentioned here, like Euroscepticism, which I believe Euroscepticism might be inspiring and positive, but what is much more dramatic is like Europhobia, Euro hate, and Euro fear, etc. But I might call myself a little bit, there might be also something called like Euro disappointism or something, say like this. I would call myself this kind of an animal in this respect, because I really believe if there is a crisis coming, or especially all these crises coming at the same time, so it's also come from the expression crisis itself, that something new should be created, and it's an opportunity to make things more functioning, and for some reforms, for some progress, for some vision, for the change. Some people, including me, believe that the Eurozone crisis and financial crisis would lead to some integrational jump forward, and this integrational jump forward didn't materialize at all. So either it is that crises are not what they used to be, or it is that we maybe need some much bigger crisis, which on the other hand we might not be able to survive. So there are similarities with the Eurozone. With the Eurozone, you only have a central bank, which is not enough for properly functioning monetary union. You definitely need some, at least little, common European bonds, some limited taxation, common taxation, some common deposit insurance schemes, etc. There is nothing. There is just central banking, and only a few years ago it started to be, the central bank started to be more active and courageous and functioning like a lender of last resort. With the migration, that's why we are here. I absolutely believe that there would be more willingness towards solidarity if there is much more orderly way to regulate and streamline the refugee wave. People, there is a it was already mentioned today, Justin Trudeau, the progressive politician of the future. Everyone loves him, he is so pretty, he loves refugees, he welcomes them himself on the airport. And but to get to Canada, you cannot just run across the border. You have to wait for a few months. You have to be properly screened, and it must be perfectly organized. So it's a very orderly process. And we know that U.S. is spending $30 billion annually for the protection of the outer borders. So Europe must spend a similar amount of money for the protection of its outer borders, because it's a similar size as the US. Its border is even more complicated, so it might be even, it should be even more. There are perfect times for it. The overall indebtedness of the EU is much lower than that of the US and Japan. You have very exceptional times with even negative interest rates, so it's possible to issue a migration bond which would finance infrastructure and common asylum policy at this and that. And I wanted to go to the details with the quotas and with the common asylum policy, but maybe we can get to it in the discussion. But I believe there is a clear demand from the voters, from the population, that if we are for solidarity, it must be absolutely combined with this process must be orderly. People are against refugees going through the border just as they wish, and EU didn't guarantee it, and obviously politicians don't give enough powers, national politicians don't give enough powers to Brussels, and then they blame Brussels for not deciding anything. So it's very smart politically, and it's making situation even worse and more dangerous, because politicians are blaming all the failures for EU, and it makes EU even less capable of deciding. But EU also needs its institution to give power to its own institutions and to its own leaders, and this is not happening. The opposite is happening. Like Angela Merkel is bypassing European institutions. She is negotiating directly with Turkey. So unless EU gives power to its all kinds of presidents, there's been a report of 5 presidents mentioned, which I really like a lot, but it's very typical that almost no one remembers it these days, and no one speaks about it. So it should respect its own president. So voters are also asking, like, what is the EU like? Is it Angela Merkel, or is it Juncker, or is it Donald Tusk, or who is in charge, who is deciding? So as a voter, I would be very confused.
Thank you, Jan. And now, so these were statements of our speakers, and now it's time for your questions. So who would like to be first? Can we...
Thanks very much. Benjamin Tallis from the Institute of International Relations, just for those who weren't at the first panel. Thanks to all the panellists. Really, really interesting points, I think, from everyone, and it does help play into the debate that we had earlier. It helps it play into a different context. A couple of remarks to different panellists, if I may. First to Mr. Omrod, as he referred to me as Mr. Tallis before. So to keep it...
I thought I just called you Mr. Tallis.
Well, indeed. So anyway, Mr. Omrod, it was interesting. You mentioned we are living in this postmodern world, as you put it, where it's all just stories, and stories don't have any necessary basis. They're just narratives we tell about ourselves and to others to try and convince. That's a pretty big claim, because that's the story that you're telling behind the story. You're telling us that is what the world is. This is the trap that Lyotard fell into as well, when saying postmodernism is a world with no meta-narrative. That is a meta-narrative. And so this it's an interesting story. I mean, I think debasing modernist claims of truth is absolutely necessary. The big capital T truth is a highly problematic concept related to expertise and many other politics. Nonetheless, in the world that you describe, we fall exactly into the world of Vladimir Putin and Russian political technologism. This is exactly the strategy that is employed by the Russian propaganda machine at the moment to create the idea that nothing is true and everything is possible, to use Petr Pomerantsev's words about it. If we debase the idea that there are some arguments that actually are based on more credible factors and less credible factors, then we potentially exactly see the equivalence of arguments that has come up and was proposed by Romagnoc, amongst everything, throwing all sorts of different arguments out, creating a huge firestorm of chaff that makes it extremely difficult to actually then make decisions between different forms of politics and understand the basis upon which we actually do that. So while I appreciate some of the scepticism you put forward, I think there's A, a hidden truth claim that you're giving us behind your story, and B, I think it's potentially a very dangerous political road to go down, which leads exactly to the kind of equivalence that Christian was talking about when talking about some people argue on the basis of research and other people argue on the basis of I hate Muslims. If we make those two things exactly equivalent, we live in a pretty dangerous world. And if those are taken as seriously as each other. Where I think is absolutely correct is what Romagnoc said, and this might be a surprise that I'm going to agree with you quite absolutely wholeheartedly, that unless there are release valves within our political system for people to express their views, we will face problems. And I think Norway, being a opposite example to use, the case of Anders Breivik is an example of where this can go wrong, where people don't see themselves as being represented in the system. Finally, a point to Jan Macharček. I wonder, I mean, this question about media is interesting, given the ownership of certain media in this country at the moment, mainstream media. The ownership of the two largest daily newspapers by the Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister, Andrej Babiš. How does that relationship, why is it that people are taking to social media so much, do you think? Is it a reaction to that? And a point to your other question about the wider panel on political radicalism and populism, is Andrej Babiš a positive force for democracy in the Czech Republic and against populism?
Thank you for your question. Who would like to react?
Shall I react first?
You can, sure.
Right. Hello, Mr. Tallis again. Benjamin. I'll call you Benjamin this time. Good. Right. Ben. Okay. It's only your truth. Now, I completely understand your arguments for the nature of reality. Now, what you've got to understand is I'm also a realist. We've got to do it some way. Okay? So, the question is, which way? Now, you and I can have this sort of big academic discussion, and I see you're sort of writing stuff down right now. But what I want to do is I want to take it away from this sort of academic nature of reality, blah, 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 and bring it back down to the individual level, to the nation-state level, to the EU level. Very sort of in your hands, as it were. Okay? So, yes, whilst we might disagree on various philosophical things, I think the focus has got to be on what's actually happening right now. Okay. With regard to your comment about Vladimir Putin, again, I think that yes, Vladimir Putin is using these particular processes, these particular ways of presenting and framing information and messages. But then, isn't that what everyone's doing? Isn't that, when you look at sort of Facebook, your Facebook feeds, isn't that what is happening? So yeah, okay, Vladimir Putin is using it, but then we're using it as well. Some of us may have sort of very pro-European perspectives. Others may have very anti-EU perspectives. But then the things we put out there, the comments we make, the images we put out, this is all something which impacts on individuals and impacts on what's going on right now. And it's the processes. Yeah, okay, Putin uses them, but so do we.
So it's already me? Okay. So I don't want to turn this into a discussion about Mr. Babiš or about the media in Czech Republic itself, or on a completely different conference, and I'm willing to discuss it like into details, but to just be very brief, I'm certainly not afraid about the pluralism of the opinion in Czech media and in Czech society. If the market is measured as far as the serious media is concerned, Mr. Babiš could get somewhere like between 15–20%. If you measure like all the tabloid media, he doesn't even have a television, so you could end up like at 9%. So other oligarchs, because you know that foreign corporations, who, especially German corporations who owned media before, pulled out. So it wasn't the oligarchs who were grabbing the media, but it was the other way around, that foreign corporations were selling the media and they needed somebody to buy it, and usually it needs someone who has money, right? Like, and then you start sort of a fever among oligarchs, because one oligarch is asking, okay, this oligarch's got media, I should also perhaps have some media, so this is exactly the picture today. And these people have completely, besides that you still can do very good journalism even in this structure of ownership. You certainly have, all these people have completely different interests, and even if they would influence the media on a daily or a weekly basis, you would end up with pluralism. It's certainly not very pleasant for the people who are working in this media, because they are, even if they write something good, they are constantly being attacked that they did it because the oligarchs decided that they should write it. So this is the main trouble. And but I'm certainly not worried about the pluralism of the media. Asking about this figure, if it's populist or not, or positive or negative for Czech society, I am not a member of ANO. You should have asked Mr. Telička when we were sitting next to him on the panel. He is a politicians of ANO, so I am not speaker of Mr. Babiš. I am not speaker of ANO, and I certainly think that the scenario was something much more before the last elections, or a few months before the last elections, was completely different. There was a plan that there would be a minority social democratic government with a different prime minister than we have today, supported by the communists and Zeman, and somehow, so the fact that this scenario didn't happen is somehow connected with the existence of this movement, which I myself would consider soft populist, but not very it has its positive and negative aspects, definitely. And I think that many politicians from ANO, mainly MEPs, all of them are very inspiring and excellent to me, and I am happy that I have a chance to cooperate with them sometimes. So that's about it. But I would like to also respond something which wasn't mentioned in the question, but I forgot it in my presentation. That you said in your presentation on your panel that it is a proven scientific fact that refugees are increasing, are good for economic benefits. So I actually, in this respect, I agree with Mr. Tomsky that it's a propaganda, even though I would wish it is that. But if you look at what academic economists say, if you look at Vox EU survey, for instance, which is the best survey which is popularizing academic research in this field, serious economist says, I don't know, we have to wait a few years before we can come with some partial conclusions. Of course, you can calculate that it's going to increase the GDP in 6 months or 1 month, whatever you can try to calculate it, but long-term conclusions, it really depends on the trust in the society, on the level of integration, etc. There are no scientific proofs and there has been many articles written about it by respected scientists. And if you want to come with credible scientific conclusions, you really need years for the research before you come with some relevant outcomes. So this is also leads to political populism and radicalism, that people are saying what they wish for, and I also wish it is like you say, but it is just not proven. Sorry.
Just one brief correction. That's a total misquote. I never said it's a proven scientific fact. And
Yeah, you said that.
As you all know, if you've actually read any of my research,
Yeah.
I don't believe there are the same kind of scientific facts in the social world. I actually share quite a lot of Rob's point of view on that, and so that's not what I would claim. I'd say there's a good basis of research and a consensus showing that, but please don't misquote me in that way as an experienced journalist.
Well, yeah, we must look at data. Probably there are some immigrant groups which are net tax money contributors to the economy and definitely are a benefit for the society. There are some perhaps other groups who are net receivers of welfare. So we must look at statistics on divisions by countries of origin and so on. But I wish to mention the issue of one politician owning newspapers. It doesn't worry me if he doesn't own all of them. That would be problematic, but it's open. And of course, in the past, in Czech politics, we knew that certain newspapers, nominally independently owned, supported one particular party, and other newspapers supported another particular party. And it seems to me that this case is more transparent. The real problem with Andrej Babiš is not ownership of media, in my view, but that he's an active politician, and at the same time, his companies make business with government, so he receives government money. That's really problematic. Concerning the media, the real serious issue, I think now in the Czech Republic, is the attack against the Czech television. A Kremlin orchestrated attack against the Czech television. That's really serious. So far unsuccessful, but who knows how long it will be unsuccessful. And that's an attack under the banner of so-called objectivity. Objectivity means 5 minutes for Anna Frank and 5 minutes for Joseph Goebbels. 5 minutes that book used against Dutch Malaysian airplane was fired by separatists. That's 5 minutes, and other 5 minutes that John McCain in his fighter shot down that Malaysian airliner because somebody in Russia says that, and that's really problematic. And I hope that Czech television will sustain that attack against this institution. That's scary.
Yeah, I would like to echo Roman's sentiments in relation to Papis, but with the caveat that it is still, at least in my opinion, problematic if an active politician owns several news outlets. It not only sets an unfortunate precedence, which is, objectively speaking, infringement on media objectivity, because maybe it all works completely fine when everything is hunky-dory and there is no vested interests in play, but when push comes to shove, and that might actually happen, then I wouldn't trust the objectivity of not only Babiš, but any politicians who have access to media outlets. It's just a separation that should be completely kept in order to preserve not only the integrity, but the power of the media, which is quite essential, or very essential in a democracy. Additionally, I have one small comment, if I may deviate from the question, to the previous sentiment that the V4 countries are not radical as Western Europe, which I find rather perplexing. But then again, I wouldn't measure how radical your country is based on the number of bombing attacks and so on. But if you look at the V4 countries at the very onset of the crisis, I would say it's quite radical that Hungary, rather than contacting the European Union, trying to strive for a common unified solution, instantly devotes an astronomical amount of money that could have been used much better, not only on integration, but also cross-border cooperation, to build a fence, launch a national billboard campaign extorting refugees not to take Hungarian people's jobs in Hungarian, Of course, we all know every refugee learns Hungarian on the way, right? As well as launching a national consultancy, which only has an 11% response rate, in which the question is asked, do you want the Hungarian government to spend money on refugees or poor Hungarian families? If you frame the question like that, of course you're going to get a singular answer, and of course you're priming your population towards making the country as inhospitable for refugees as possible. When one country does that, when Hungary does that, of course it creates a domino effect, because refugees are not going to stay in a country where that is openly hostile to them. They're going to move on. And when that happens, it's very easy to denote them as economic migrants, but honestly, can you blame them if they're going to be the victims of hate crimes, much like Roma people, being treated as appallingly as they are? No, of course they're going to move on, and of course they're going to move to more, I would not like to put value in this sentiment, but maybe more open societies. Of course they're going to do that, but of course it also creates problems, like we saw in Germany. Germany gets overloaded, Sweden gets overloaded. When Sweden gets overloaded, Denmark has to introduce border controls in order not to be an end station and be overloaded. At least that's what politicians say. And it creates this deteriorating race to the bottom, where we all try to compete on how inhospitable we can make it for refugees. I would say the V4 countries are responsible for quite a radical turn, not just here, but across Europe. I mean, when you ask the V4 countries, well, you don't like the quota system, fair enough. Why? Most government officials are saying, well, administratively it's very hard to implement, it doesn't make sense. Or they just say they don't agree with it. They don't propose any counter solution. They're not the ones taking the initiative to actually make this work on a European level, because it's way too easy to just sit back and say, okay, we don't like this, and screw Brussels, they're imposing quotas on us, and they're imposing fees on us. And then you hear the rhetoric becoming worse and worse, like Fico in Slovakia, saying just a couple of days ago that, yeah, look, this is very controversial, but Muslims don't belong in this country. There were Muslims before the refugee crisis. Apparently back then there wasn't any problem related to them, but now suddenly we're approaching rhetoric that borderlines bans a certain religion, one of our fundamental human rights. And we're doing it, and it's originating in the region that has received the fewest refugees of everyone. I don't know how many in this room. I mean, you're not the typical Czech audience, I would say, unfortunately. But how many Czechs in the street encounters Muslims every day? Being Danish, I would do it every day if I was in Copenhagen or Aarhus, where I'm from. I've never been harassed, never been attacked. Of course that's anecdotal, and of course there are problems related to refugees from MENA countries, amongst them higher crime rates, harder integration. It doesn't mean we shouldn't tackle those challenges. It doesn't mean we should cave in to the lowest common denominator. And that's what's happening, and the V4 countries are in large part having a stake in this turn for the worse.
I'm sorry, I really hate to say this, but we really used our time. We are over our time. So, and the discussion would be really interesting if we would have time to continue. But once again, I'm really sorry to cut it right now. I would like to thank our speakers that they joined us and that they shared their ideas, their contribution with us. And I would like to thank you as an audience and for your attention, and I hope that speeches, contributions you heard were kind of motivative for you, and I would like to thank you that you are interested in political issues as well. So have a nice evening, and once again, thank you all.